With that, by the looks of it, I think we're all back here. So information technology is great when it's working, but every once in a while you run into a glitch with it. So we apologize for that, but we've been fairly fortunate over the last 3 or 4 months on it's worked reasonably well. But we will proceed, and I'll bring this June 22nd, 2020 council meeting to order now. So I thank all of my colleagues and staff very much for joining us here today. So if I could suggest we have a moment of silent reflection and then our national anthem, O Canada, before we proceed. And thank you very much. With that, Madam Clerk, agenda announcements and/or amendments.
Thank you. Just 2 announcements. The first one, staff report ES 0720 was included as an addendum item on Friday, June 19th, and was circulated and posted to the town's website. This item should be added to the agenda as item 3 under items for consideration, not item 4 as previously referenced. I also just wanted to note that the agenda referenced acting mayor for a portion of the meeting, but I just wanted to confirm that the mayor will continue to chair all portions of the meetings during our election or our electronic council meetings.
Madam Clerk, are there any disclosure by any member of council at this point? Not seeing any, so we will proceed with the consent items. I have a resolution moved by Councillor Di Lorenzo and second by Councillor Cluett, and be it resolved that consent items numbers 1 to 6 be approved. And I am aware so far that item number 3, item number 4, and item number 6 have been pulled out for discussion. Number 3, Councillor Challoner. Number 4, Councillor Ali, and Councillor Christina Tesser-Dirksen. Number 6. Is there any other item that any member wish pulled out, dealt with separately? Being none, then Councillor Challoner, I'll take them in order. Number 3.
Thanks, Your Worship. I don't have so much a question as a comment with respect to the report. In each of the departmental aspects of the operating capital, there's a lot of information there. My concern is about the consolidated slide near the top and how fulsome it is in terms of providing financial information. Staff had put together a very good template on the coronavirus pandemic response, and it included a financial review. And we had talked about in late April, I believe it was introduced, of circulating it every couple of weeks with an update, and including a financial update. And I think that this financial information, I'm not as concerned about the capital as I am about the operating, isn't quite as fulsome as I'd like to see, and quite frankly, as we need to see in terms of where specifically we are. It shares with you our percentage spend, but doesn't get into to actual dollars in the consolidated slide. And I think it kind of needs to. In the past, I've talked about a proper operating budget or a proper capital budget document, and I know that staff are working towards that. But if we could be a little more fulsome in terms of the consolidated information that we're providing to council, perhaps take a look at the template that was circulated, continue to circulate that document more frequently, because I think that we need more information than is here from a consolidated perspective.
Okay, thank you, Councilor Chandler. And again, Glenn, if you could maybe address that, and maybe Andrew has something further to add in just a moment. So Glenn, to you.
Sure, thank you, Mayor. So what you're seeing here in the form of the April statements, I just want to remind council, it is just one piece of the overall financial reporting framework. As noted, there have been other updates that included things like property assessment, or sorry, property taxation updates, cash flow updates, as well as some of the operating information with some context to go with it. Those have continued to be provided through the more informal circulations to council. We do the bi-weekly right now, where 1 week it's the CAO email, the other week it'll be an internal report for councillors. So we have continued with that information in that venue. The next two main points where council will see the deeper dives into information. One is part of our regular process at the May month-end statements. We do the full-blown update to the operating forecast. We provide a lot of detail and commentary in there. And I think one thing the councillor will be happy to see in the one coming up is we have also heard some of the suggestions before, and you're going to see a more fulsome update on balance sheet items in the operating variance report than you might have in the past in, say, the May report. Some of it we do at year end, but we are making improvements to make it more continuous at the key points throughout the year as well. Another change that's been discussed before, just so council keeps line of sight on it, that we're working towards is including in the statements the comparison, the year over year point in time references as well. It's not lost on us. The two main things that the reasons you won't see it quite yet in the statements. One is because we are incorporating in the statements themselves the scenarios, which was the request of council to continue to see them, but on more of a departmental basis. And then the second thing is just from an implementation standpoint, there's a little bit of testing that we'll have to do just to make sure, because it'll be a new report function that we'll be using, that the information is accurate. So these April statements, we have presented them more in the traditional approach of what we've done in prior years. But again, it wasn't to exclude the other pieces of information. It was just more in recognition that we've got a couple different avenues of information sharing right now where we're going to bring those forward.
Andrew, add any further?
Nothing further, Mayor.
Thank you very much. Councilor Chandler, back over to you.
I look forward to the next set of statements, Your Worship.
Very good. Thank you. Is there anything further on item number 3 by any member of council? If not, we will move to item number 4. Councillor Ali, you asked for this to be pulled out and dealt with separately. Welcome.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you, I would like to actually inquire from Madam Clerk some clarification on the amendments to Parks bylaw. And with reference especially, you will see on page 57, the last paragraph, it talks about, should it be necessary to make application to the Ministry of Attorney General seeking the approval of further set fines? I would like to know what those further set fines are, or what examples of further set fines could be. There is some confusion within the community and residents on this, so I would like some clarity.
Thank you very much, Madam Clerk.
Thank you, Nina. I was wondering if we could promote Mary Beth Mitchell with respect to those specific amendments within the bylaw.
Yes, promoting right now.
Thank you.
She should be joining shortly.
Thank you.
She seems to be in limbo. She's not in the attendee section and she hasn't made her way over. Jeff, I know you're trying to get the live feed back up. Can you see as well? Oh,
Mary Beth, she should be coming over. It takes about 30 seconds. Well, that one
she's
we can
going to
fix.
try.
I'll invite her in.
Perfect.
In the meantime, Your Worship, maybe I can take a stab at this. I'm not entirely sure of the question, Councillor Lee, but basically set fines are used for ticketable offenses. And so enforcement officers would have the option of writing a ticket for an infraction under the Parks bylaw. Having said that, staff would not be writing tickets, nor have we yet to date. We've been focusing on the education component for that. So the set fine would simply be an application process to the Ministry of the Attorney General to allow approval of a fine amount for an infraction of the bylaw.
Councillor Ali, I'm not sure if that addresses your concern, but we're still waiting to see if Mary Beth has any further to add.
Thank you, Your Worship. Yes, I would just like to have some examples of these fines, like in what situation a fine would be given out. It is important for us to know that, I believe.
Yeah, Troy, to the best of your knowledge.
Your Worship, where a fine would be levied is if it was in the officer's discretion as almost a last resort. So if somebody refused to comply with what is being asked, they would have the option of laying a fine. But we would not be proactively going out there looking for people to give tickets to.
Okay, I understand that Mary Beth is with us there now. So Mary Beth, welcome. I don't know if you've heard the question and or the debate to this point. Mary Beth with us?
I see she has joined us over as a panelist, but her sound and video are off. Mary Beth, I'm asking you to unmute. I'm just wondering if she may be having some difficulties. No, there we go.
Mary Beth, were you able to hear the question and or the conversation to date?
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you, I heard portions of it, and I do apologize. I got disconnected when I was promoted over. Thank you for the inquiry, Councillor Lee. I did hear some of the response from Commissioner Maharg, and I think that he has sort of covered it, specifically with an example of what we would apply a ticket for, Provincial Offences Act ticket for, would be failure to comply with the direction of staff. So we would do the education piece in an effort to gain compliance, and if that were not possible at that time, we would be using that as a last resort.
Thank you, Mary Beth. That answers my question. What I want to give as a staff direction is that we should not do what Oakville is doing. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Is any other member of council anything on item number 4? Councillor Lee, nothing further?
No, thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you. We will move forward. Councillor Tesser-Dirksen, number 6, you asked to be pulled out and dealt with separately. Councillor?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, just a broad question about the potential projections for actual jobs that might be created through this employment land. I'm not sure if staff have any projections at this point.
Now, I'm not sure, Barb, I'm being led to believe that you might be the most appropriate to respond to this. So, Ms. Koopmans?
Through you, Your Worship, we don't have any projections in terms of jobs at this point in time. My understanding is that it may well accommodate larger box warehousing and logistics. However, the economy is so fluid right now and everything's changing. It will permit a broad range of employment uses that are complementary to the employment area that's already there.
Councillor, any further?
No, that's good. Thanks very much.
Any other member of council, anything on item number 6? And again, moving forward, you heard the resolution before on adopting the consent items 1 to 6, and I will assume that unless I see a hand go up there, that everybody's in favor of the adoption of the consent items. And again, that's carried. I have a resolution moved by Councillor Di Lorenzo and second by Councillor Cluett, and be it resolved the council authorize the virtual statutory public meetings under the Planning Act to be held in order to satisfy the public consultation requirements of the Act, to allow land use planning application to be processed and decisions made, and that the necessary amendments to the procedure bylaw included on the June 22nd, 2020 council meeting agenda be approved. And again, to staff, is there any brief overview needed on this resolution? At least in my opinion, I think it's pretty straightforward. Any member of council, any questions on this resolution and or this report? Being none, I will assume that the biggest majority of us are in favor of it unless I see a hand go up. Okay, that's carried. I have a resolution moved by Councillor Di Lorenzo and second by Councillor Cluett. And be it resolved that Development Services Report DS 014-20 outlining the town initiated official plan and zoning bylaw amendments to update town policies and regulations regarding licensed recreational cannabis production and processing facilities be approved in accordance with the draft amendment and bylaws numbers attached as Appendix 1, 2, and 3 to this report. And the staff be authorized to bring forward the official plan amendment and zoning bylaw amendment for council adoption. And again, is there any necessity for any staff review on this one or introduction? Again, it is the laws of the land. Okay, Councillor Best, I understand that you wish to speak to it. Councillor Best.
Yes, Your Worship. Just a couple of questions and comments. I've consulted with some people in the business, and I think a number of councils remember some of the conference workshops we have. I appreciate staff's comments regarding odor and light and dust. One of the big concerns that I have is, no matter whether it's in the rural or urban area, is sanitary sewers. Most sewage plants aren't equipped to deal with this type of outflow. And I just ask the staff to keep in touch with the health department and the Halton Regional Waste Management company or groups, because it's a real concern there, as well as the setback requirements. According to the experts, the odor can be smelt almost 2 to 3 kilometers away. And you only have to talk to the mayor and staff at the town of Leamington. They have a huge greenhouse operation there, and also basically checking on your site plans with Milton Hydro, because I understand these plants use a lot of hydro, and they may need additional transformer stations to equip them. So I just ask the staff, when there are site plan and other considerations, we'll keep in touch with other municipalities and services. That's all.
Thank you. Ms. Coopmans, I was just wondering, addressing those 2 or 3 items that Councillor Best just brought up there, I just wonder if you have any response in regards to, say, sewage treatment, odor, et cetera, at this point.
Through you, Your Worship, to my knowledge, we have not had any feedback on sewage treatment. However, please be assured that regional staff is circulated on every site plan application. So they would internally coordinate comments in that regard, as is Milton Hydro in terms of hydro capacity. And we are well aware of the odor issues and looking for odor. There's a study that would be required to look at mitigation.
Councillor Best, any further at this point?
Thank you. Just so hope that staff keep in touch. I understand Langley, BC also has a situation where they have hundreds of complaints because no matter how well they try to mask the odors, it still comes through. And I understand mushroom plants are tame in comparison.
Yeah. Hey, point certainly well made. I think Moses are aware of those odors. Thank you, Councillor Best. Councillor Tesser-Dirksen.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just kind of curious with respect to the site plan approval that's required for cannabis production and processing facilities. I think that's good. I support the prospect of having site plan approval for these particular facilities. I'm just wondering though, because on page 97, it mentions that with respect to setbacks, that there's no justification to single out one industrial use and not others. I'm wondering if there's any room for potential legal exposure to the town by a facility owner who might be saying requiring site plan approval is unfair in some way. I'm just wondering if staff want to comment on that. I'm sure they've already thought of it.
Yeah, Ms. Koopmans, I'm not sure, and again, it's a great question. I'm not sure if it'd fall under the category of the possibility of obnoxious there when it comes to odor and stuff like that. Ms. Koopmans?
Through you, Your Worship, I can start answering the question, and I may ask Jill Hogan to jump in as well. In terms of the Planning Act, Council has applied site plan control across the corporation with some exemptions for certain agricultural uses, for example. However, site plan is a broad tool that can be used. I think in terms of some of these facilities, and when we get into more on-farm diversified uses that we're going to be looking at through the official plan review program, it is likely that we may look at instances where we would apply site plan to some of these additional uses as well. So there is an open and transparent process whereby council can apply site plan, and it is not an overly onerous requirement given the nature of the facility. It is constituted as development and rightly falls within the purview of site plan control.
Ms. Hogan, I'm going to assume that you heard the question of Councillor Tesser-Dirksen, and I'm going to assume you heard Ms. Koopman's comment. Just wonder if you have anything further to add.
I think Ms. Koopman's answered the question very well, and maybe just a point of clarification about setbacks. There are required setbacks from cannabis facilities to sensitive land uses, so things like schools, daycares, public open space, that sort of thing. In the rural area, there's a 150-meter required setback from property to property line, and in the industrial area, it's a 70-meter setback property to property line from sensitive land uses. So just that clarification.
I thank you very much, Councillor Tesser-Dirksen. Anything further?
No, thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Any other member of council, any question or comments on this item number 2 under consideration? Nothing further. I'm going to assume the majority of us are in favor of this resolution unless I see a bunch of hands go up. And I'm not seeing any hands go up, so that is carried. And again, item number 4 or item number 3, as the clerk had mentioned, it's been just juggled, just the numbers. Ms. Scott is going to give us a a brief overview with regards to this addendum that come out on the weekend. So Ms. Scott, if you would, because this is a very important document in recovery of not only this community of Milton, community of Halton, and of course across the province and across the nation. So we're in, I wouldn't suggest total lockstep with every other community, but I believe certainly reasonably close to it. So it's a fairly comprehensive document as we move forward. So Ms. Scott, welcome. Thank you.
Thanks, Your Worship. I wish I could see everyone in person, but I'm pleased to be speaking with you today virtually about resuming services. It's been very difficult to keep track of the provincial announcements and updated regulations, public health guidelines, and what this all means for the programs and services residents use and expect here in Milton. And as Council's aware, last Monday, the province announced that Halton Region was able to move to stage 2 effective June 19th. Staff's been working nonstop on various scenarios and program redesigns. And it is not as easy as turning on a light switch, as you can imagine. And we really appreciate everyone's patience as we ensure that we open our amenities in the safest manner possible. And Nina and I are sort of tag teaming here, and I can't see Nina, so I'm just going to tell you, advance the slide, Nina. Does that work for you?
Sounds good.
Perfect. What I'll be focusing on in this presentation is what stage 2 means for Milton, the approach to decision making, and the proposed strategies for our resumption of services in the areas of programs and facilities. And staff want to make sure Council's supportive of those directions that are proposed. Next slide, please. So we moved to stage 2 of the framework to reopen the province on June 19th. Table 1, which is found on page 3 of your report, for those of you who are following along, provides a high-level summary of the regulations that must be followed for the items listed on this slide. And in some cases, there's other guidelines as well, requirements and consultations that need to be followed in addition to the regulation itself, which makes resuming programs and services a little bit more challenging. Next slide, please. There continues to be many factors outside of Milton's control. However, the guiding principles listed on the screen continue to be applied in our decision making, and those are safety, delivery of essential public services, responsiveness to community needs, fair and equitable treatment of our workforce, and fiscal responsibility. Other considerations in stage 2 has included, but not limited to, consultation with Parks and Recreation Ontario and other municipalities. The mayor mentioned lockstep, and we do try to work with our Halton municipalities as much as possible to make sure none of us are moving too far ahead or fall too far behind. We're working on guidance documents and program redesigns. Industry experts such as ORFA, which is the Ontario Recreation Facilities Association, and the Life Saving Society, on protocols and policies for items such as sanitation and capacity limits. And of course, the Halton Region Public Health Department. It has been a challenge due to lack of clarity in some of the regulations. We're not the only ones experiencing that feeling. Different interpretations across the sector, the speed at which the province changes direction, and managing public expectations, which I know is also challenging for members of council. As previously mentioned, although the province may announce changes in the regulations, we do need time to receive any kind of supporting documentation and requirements, to review them, and to plan for a safe resumption of our services. Next slide, please, Nina. This slide lists our facility strategy for stage 2. Most municipalities are taking a walk before we run approach in stage 2 and running limited programs, facilities, and or modified hours. The current directives limit what can be offered in stage 2, and there is a need to modify the way we would have typically offered any of our programs and services within our facilities. And this is another reason why more time is sometimes needed before we're in a position to safely respond to those changing directions. Staff's doing our best to scale a Made in Milton approach to adapt our services based on the directives and program demands. And based on what we're able to deliver, we would like to resume indoor services such as ice rentals, aquatic programs, and modified camp programs this summer. And as you can see by looking at the chart on the slide, Staff is recommending that the Sherwood Community Center reopen, and that's mainly due to the amenities available to support those stage 2 services. We would scale the facility and future ones based on demand and adherence to the directives. The remaining facilities would remain essentially closed in phase 2 unless there was sufficient program demands in the area of aquatics and ice rentals. We are able to offer some additional services such as indoor permits. They could also be considered based on facility availability, guidance to the Provincial Sport Organization guidelines, or meeting the requirements for gatherings and physical distancing. Just a reminder, we introduced our campus sites, which has been quite successful so far, whereby most of our facility maintenance team is actually outside for the summer supporting the operations division. And switching gears is possible to support the increase in programming and rental requests, but we do need to be mindful of having a balanced approach in order to maintain our service levels as best we can across all areas. I also just want to point out that community services is working right now with 20% of our regular workforce. So as we bring back facilities and programs, we will need to start recalling staff in order to provide those essential supports. Next slide, please, Nina. Nina?
Sorry, just 1 second.
That's okay.
Okay.
And your worship, if it's easier, I'm happy to take questions as we go through the individual sections. So just I'll leave that up to you to manage that part.
I think probably if you just proceed, I think, Christine, with your presentation. And I know my colleagues are pretty good on making some notes, and I have a speakers list now, so there are going to be questions. So if
Sure.
you just proceed.
Sure. This slide is regarding day camps, and as can be expected, we must adhere to stricter guidelines during this time, and these were provided to all day camp operators by the province on June the 1st, and they were quite extensive and included as part of the initial report. When a facility is used for camps, there is limited to no use for other programs and rental during those designated times. So it's just really a balancing act in terms of our facility allocation and our programs during those designated times. Staff has developed a modified program plan, mostly for residents who require childcare options. A maximum of 53 spaces can be made available each week across 3 facilities. And the plan is that spaces will be phased in based on demand. So once one location fills out, we would open up another location. We'd be using our full-time staff as site supervisors, and part-time staff would be required to help support those camp operations. We would anticipate being able to start probably the week of July the 20th, as we need about 3 to 4 weeks of preparation. And just want to point out, the number of available spaces may seem small, but it is relative to what Burlington, Oakville, and other municipalities are able to do. And that's really to do with the current guidelines, restrictions, and just the different facility configurations that are available. Things like requiring specific washroom facilities for campers, maintaining cohorts, and things like that. Next slide, please, Nina. The Sherwood Community Center was already scheduled to have both pads of ice available for this summer. We've reached out to our user groups like figure skating and hockey to ensure that demand still existed given the current situation. No public access programs are permitted in stage 2. However, based on input from the groups who meet their respective provincial sport organization guidelines, approximately 90 hours of ice could be booked this summer at Sherwood. That's just based on us reaching out and them indicating what their demands are. In terms of scalability, we would manage the dates and times to control costs and provide availability to those groups. And additional ice surfaces could be installed later this summer or early fall based on facility availability and program demand. Next slide, please, Nia. So there's lots of excitement and enthusiasm regarding spray pads, especially with the warmer weather. Operations staff has been working hard and planning to make 14 spray pads operational as of this Friday, including the new one at Ford Neighborhood Park, which we're really excited to be able to open. At this time, Rotary Park would remain closed because the operating system's linked to the pool, which I'll talk about just in a couple of minutes. It's super important that people understand that since spray pads and playgrounds are in close proximity to one another, the play structures still remain closed, and that is under the provincial directive. Parents must supervise their children at all times and adhere to physical distancing, which we all know can be challenging. We do not want to be in a position to have to turn the pads off. So it is super important that people follow the guidelines posted at each location. And even this morning, there's been many meetings with public health regarding spray pads. We are still working out some of the details related to capacities and whether or not they will be certain capacities at each location with public health. Additional public education will be provided via our social media channels, our website, and through our new Park Ambassador program that will be officially launched on Friday to coincide with the openings. And hopefully this will alleviate some of the confusion and provide up-to-date information for families prior to using these amenities. Next slide, please, Nina. This slide's about indoor pools, and obviously they're highly regulated. Milton uses policies and protocols established by the Life Saving Society. And staff has established capacity levels for all our pools using those Life Saving Society guidelines, which is 25% of pool capacity. And a review of our pool configurations need to ensure physical distancing can be possible. Our strategy proposes that the Sherwood Community Center pool open on July 13th. That would be for daily pre-registration programs. And just I want to point out, there is an update to the capacity levels for Sherwood that is listed in the report. It should have been 128 bathers, not 98 bathers. And these numbers they are approximate. This is based on the proposed initial programming that would start up. And it can obviously be expanded at this location as required because indoor pools have a little bit more flexibility in terms of they're not subject to weather or require daylight to operate. Similar to our ice strategy, days and times would be managed to control costs and be scalable and provide availability. And our remaining 2 pools would be phased in based on availability and demand, noting just that the Sports Center pool is closed until September for some extensive pool maintenance. Next slide, please, Nina. Staff reviewed the capacity at Rotary Pool under the new guidelines, and to successfully meet these levels would propose a new program this summer if it were to operate. We would introduce a daily prepaid registration system that could serve either 3 lane swimmers or 14 bathers during fun swims with maximum times permitted, which would be a different type of service compared to previous summers where families obviously could just show up on a nice day and stay as long as their children wanted to swim and sort of as long as the pool was open. I'm almost glad I can't see everyone right now. This recommendation will not be popular, but due to capacity limits, timing to operationalize the pool in a limited season, staff are recommending that we idle the pool for 2020 and plan to focus on a 2021 reopening. Unfortunately, Rotary Pool is not configured to support the various directives and requirements without significantly limiting capacity, which is why we are suggesting that the focus for heat relief this summer be on the spray pads and the Sherwood Community Center pools, whose hours can be expanded, as I just mentioned. Just one thing to note, the Rotary spray pad is linked to the system for the pool, and we could separate those. We could actually start up the spray pad, but we are suggesting idling that asset as well, unless council wishes otherwise, because we essentially would have to, I'm not going to use these terms correctly, but de-winterize the asset to get it up and running again, and then we have to do the reverse on the other end. So it would be about another $5,000 just to activate the spray pad, plus our regular operating costs, which traditionally are about, I'm going to ballpark between $20,000 and $15,000 a season for each spray pad. Next slide, please, Nina. There's been a lot of engagement with our sport groups during this time, particularly the outdoor ones, given the season. It has been very challenging for our affiliate user groups. They are run by volunteers, and there's a lot of uncertainty around risk, cost, restrictions, provincial sport organization guidelines, and whether they'll even be able to play games this season. They've had to make a major pivot, and we really do appreciate the work they do on behalf of the Milton community. There's tremendous volunteers in all our sport organizations, and they're really, really working hard under some unprecedented times. The regulation in the area of outdoor sport permits is fairly specific in terms of groups operating for training purposes only in phase 2. There are no games or scrimmages permitted. There was a recent change, and when compared to indoor sports, organizations that operate outdoors must develop plans based on guidelines from their PSOs versus them being provided with expectations for adherence. So there's a bit of a contradiction in the report, given that things are constantly evolving. Our sport fields have been maintained as open spaces, and during stage 2 would not require lining and other enhancements due to the type of play permitted. Obviously that would change if games were to be allowed. And sports fields can be made available. Select sports fields can be made available and permitted based on that demand. Next slide, please, Nina. Oh, you have to hit it again. Sorry. There. That really concludes my presentation. But before I end, oh, hold on, I can go on video now. There. But before I end, I really just wanted to take a moment to virtually thank the phenomenal team that I work with every day. The world of frontline service delivery looks so different than it did 3 months ago, and there is no best practices for how to deal with this during the pandemic. We really are learning as we go, and just the flexibility and willingness of the entire team to just roll up their sleeves has just really been amazing, and something that I'm super proud to be part of. But I also want to thank council. You've been very patient and very supportive of our team as we've adjusted to our new reality, and that really means a lot to us. And I know sometimes you don't always hear the good things, so I just wanted to pass that along as well on behalf of the group. So with that said, Your Worship, I'm pleased to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Christina. As I mentioned before, I do have a speakers list, and in this order: Councillor Best, Councillor Tesser-Dirksen, Councillor Challoner, and Councillor Melboof, in that order so far. So Councillor Best.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship, and thank you, Christine, for your presentation and comments. I know it's unprecedented times, and I agree with you. It's the province has not been totally clear, but it's all new for them too, and that's something that I found from the AMO board meetings. Is trying to get a clear picture from the province and where we're going. They've admitted themselves they don't know. And they're just basically doing by stages. One of the main concerns I have is looking at the stages we're at right now. There's been no indication of the province of ever going to stage 3. And there's also the fears of a second wave of COVID, where we might have to actually go back to a stage 1 or even more restrictions. As staff plan for that contingency?
In terms of the programs and facilities, we do have the ability to scale up or scale back. And I know on July the 9th, we actually are presenting our recovery plan, and that will show in terms of the plan itself, we actually almost have 3 different phases within stage 2 within the Milton recovery plan. So those will be presented on July the 9th, but we do have the ability to either flex up or flex back depending on what the situation is. Hopefully, we're all moving in a positive direction and we won't have to revert, but there is always that possibility, of course.
Thank you. I just wish you hope you can keep in touch with the health department, because their recommendations are very important in this. And also looking at long term, I saw a chart the other day just highlighting all the from level 1 to level 9, and gyms and senior services are some of the more strict ones. So that's something that we should proceed with caution for the indoor facilities. So good luck for and all your staff, and look forward to the next stage.
Thank you. Just to follow up, Your Worship, on Councillor Best's comment about public health, we do just talk about our plans with public health on quite a regular basis. Like I said, I think I've spoken to them about 3 times just about splash pads. So it is definitely top of mind and something that we take seriously, because it's super important that we can safely resume to either play or using the amenities.
Any further, Councillor Best?
No, thanks.
Councillor Tesser-Dirksen.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you to Commissioner Scott for the report. Part of my question was already answered with respect to games being permitted versus just training. I guess, so would practice be considered training? I presume it would.
Yeah, it's pretty specific in the provincial sport organization regulations. It's pretty well, I can't even speak right now. Pretty distinct on what they're permitted. In the regulation, it speaks to training purposes only. So if groups have any questions, they can feel free to follow up with our staff. Our staff have reviewed all of the guidelines and can perhaps provide a little bit more direction if they're unsure.
Thank you. And Mr. Mayor, if I could follow up with another question.
Yes.
I'm just curious as to how staff have kind of done that reach out to different groups. It seems like a little bit of a chicken before the egg type of situation where you're not going to open up unless the demand is there, but do groups know that it's available to them, again, for training purposes if they're able to get out and rent ice to create some revenue?
So in the case of indoor, I said indoor is a little bit different than outdoor. Indoor is very explicit in terms of it must be groups that adhere to the provincial sport organization. So for instance, the beer leagues and whatnot don't meet provincial sport organization guidelines. So if I can use ice as an example, because I'm probably a little more familiar with that. Hockey Canada and then the Ontario Hockey Federation came out with very specific guidelines that said you either must be a minor sport organization to deliver those hockey-based services, or you must go through a program where essentially you become a certified organization and then follow the guidelines and operate ice. Same with figure skating. So indoor is a little bit different than outdoor, but I would suggest, and Doug is on the screen, his staff have been working very closely with all of our affiliated user groups. So if Doug can provide a little bit more information in terms of what type of engagement has taken place to date, there he is coming on the screen. Hi, Doug.
Yeah, Doug, go ahead, just adding to the question and Christina's comments.
Good afternoon. Through your worship, yes, staff have been engaged with all of the local sport groups since the pandemic really started. So there's been ongoing dialogue and discussions. Everybody's trying to help each other out and support those groups to figure out what's going to be the best way for them to, return to safely use the facility. So we have a fairly accurate read, I would say, of what the community is looking for. And I think we're fairly up to speed with what that demand is. As Christine did mention, some of the, perhaps maybe some of the smaller groups that may be looking to, that aren't really quite affiliated with provincial sport organizations, particularly on the outside, may be coming forward shortly on that. And again, as Christine mentioned, we have developed a program that is scalable, that we can flex up or down depending on what that demand is.
Councillor Tesser-Dirksen, back over to you.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. I have a husband at home who I'm just itching to get back out on the ice. So, and he is in a beer league. So we'll stay tuned to hear more positive news, hopefully in the future. Thank you.
I suspect many in the community is in the exact same position there. Just before I get to Councillor Challoner, I guess one small editorial on it. And as you would suspect, I've had the same conversation with Christina as I have with the CEO, with not only the bottom line, but the uptake or the lack thereof with regards to some of the facility. And you're absolutely right. It's something like a chicken and egg, what comes first. So I think so far we've been fairly lucky on bringing it all together roughly at the same time. So I think we're fortunate in that regard. Walking before you run, I think, is the approach that we're taking here. Councillor Tesser-Dirksen, anything further? Councillor Challoner.
Thanks, Your Worship. Councillor Best had actually asked my first question, and my first question was around, what happens if that second wave comes, and you apparently you are prepared for that, so that's great. I would just point you to a report in the National Post on the weekend called "The Next 100 Days." And it was a series of interviews with epidemiologists, and you might find it helpful, all members of council. It's interesting, I was speaking to Avery Shenfield last week, who some of you are familiar with, and I ask him a question every 6 months. What is the canary in the coal mine for you? And the canary in the coal mine for him is what the epidemiologists are saying, because that will dictate everything that takes place on our planet in the next 100 days. My second question and my last question really is around this information and all the other information that staff is collecting. Are you looking at, and this is maybe a question for Andrew, Your Worship, are you looking at putting it all together so that it's easily accessible by council? Because there are a lot of changes taking place literally every day. And in order to stay on top of it, it would be great to sort of have one place where we can go to get the latest updates.
Mr. CEO?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, that we are doing. There will be a couple of components to it. Number one, my regular updates. Number two, there'll be a significant update on July 9th, which will have a lot of this information sort of repositioned in terms of where we're at that specific time. So the answer is definitely.
Chandler?
Thanks, Your Worship.
Now, before I move on to Councillor Melboof and Councillor Chandler, I'm not familiar with that 100-day report that you just had mentioned. So, and I'm not sure how many of my colleagues may or may not be aware, or for that matter, staff. So I'm just wondering if staff could make sure that all of us, including me, get that, because, and I think you're right, moving forward, it's going to be critical to, especially those professionals that are out there on advising us elected people as to what to do or what not to do. So if I can make sure we see that. CEO is indicating that he'll make sure that every one of us elected people and senior staff get that. Councillor Chandler, anything further?
That's it, Your Worship. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Melboof.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. My questions have been asked and answered, so thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Cluett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thanks to staff again for this report. I know that Christine highlighted it, and I kind of use with the tongue firmly in cheek, saying it's not like we have a policy document, you know, in case of pandemic, flip to page 470 or whatever it may be to get all these things done. So I know a lot of hard work has gone into it. I know it wasn't really addressed in the report, and my concern obviously is it's summertime and the heat is. We've been getting, I think we're on our third heat alert for Halton region. Just wondering if there's any plans for any of the facilities to offer outside of the ones that are open, if there is possible, for cooling stations or cooling centers as we normally do during heat alerts. And I know that there's obviously a lot of challenges around that, especially from the physical distancing side, but are there any plans in place or contingency plans for cooling centers?
Christine or Doug, either one of you individuals on that point?
Yeah, I'll try this one, and then Doug can jump in if he wants to. We have reviewed obviously the different protocols and such. Halton Region did, Public Health Department did send out protocols that cooling centers, if you were to operate, must follow. Traditionally in Milton, staff are unaware of people who come to our centers for the sole purpose of cooling. In talking with with Oakville and Burlington, Oakville has hosted one. Nobody showed up. I think Burlington was the same. So it would be difficult for us to open for the sole purpose of, if we didn't really have that advance notice of a heat warning, given that most of our buildings are idle. In addition, all of our systems essentially for utility savings purposes have essentially been either turned off or shut right down again. So it may actually be cooler outside than it is in some of our centers some days. That said, we are trying to obviously provide some heat relief. The splash pads and at Sherwood, our buses are air conditioned and whatnot. So Doug, I'm not sure if I really missed anything. If there really was that need and that demand from the community, we could certainly find a way to open a center, but it would be for the sole purpose of coming in and cooling. So if I can use an example in Oakville, they have a few chairs set up in one of the lobbies of their rec centers. People come in, they would sit, they would cool off, they would leave. There is nothing else for them to do. So I'm not sure what the uptake would be. Doug, I'm not sure if you got anything to add to that or not.
Doug?
No, I have nothing further to add on it.
Good. Councillor Cluett, back over to you.
No, that's great. Again, I know that when we do have these cooling centers open during the summer, there's not a lot of uptake, but just in case, and I'm just considering seniors as well for the different facilities. But everything, as long as the options are available in case anything does happen, that's fantastic. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Councillor Ali?
Your worship, through you, my question is for Christine, and the question is, when can badminton groups start renting our facilities to play badminton?
Christina?
So currently, badminton's not permitted under stage 2. So it would be essentially as the restrictions are lifted and as we phase our facilities back in. So not right now, but hopefully soon.
Thank you. As you know, this is my personal interest, but another up is, can we probably rent out our tennis courts, outdoor ones like the one we have in the Optimist Park, and convert that into a badminton court, if that is possible?
Through you, your worship, at this time, I'm not aware of what the conversion would be, what kind of conversions would need to be required. So right now, our tennis courts are public access tennis courts, other than the ones at the tennis clubs. So currently, right now, I would suggest that converting a court into badminton is probably not available at this time. We could certainly look into it, but they are public access courts.
Thank you. Thank you. As long as we're going to look into it, that answers my question.
Okay, thank you. I do not at this moment have any further speakers on item ES 007-20, but I do have a resolution. I will read it. Moved by Councillor Di Lorenzo and second by Councillor Cluett, and be it resolved that staff be directed to present the Town of Milton Recovery Plan on July the 9th, 2020, as described herein. The council support the strategies for stage 2 resumption of services as further outlined in this report. Number 1, facility strategy, table 2. Number 2, recreation programs and services strategies, table 3. Part A, day camps. Part B, ice services. Part C, splash pads. Part D, pools. Part E, Rotary Outdoor Pool. Part F, outdoor sports permits. And that Milton Transit and Milton Public Library Services updates provided in this report be received for information. And that, members of council, is the report and the resolution dealing with this addendum item known as ES 007-20. Are there any questions with regards to the resolution and or the report? Being none, then I will assume that everyone is in favor of it unless I see a hand go up in opposition. That is carried. The resolution moved by Councillor Di Lorenzo and second by Councillor Cluett, and be it resolved that bylaws number 041-2020 through and including 051-2020 be read, passed, and numbered, and that the mayor and the town clerk be authorized to sign the said bylaws, seal them with the seal of the corporation, and that they be engrossed in the bylaw book. Is there any one of these bylaws that any member of council wish taken out and dealt with separately? Not again, I will assume that the majority of us are in favor of all the readings of these bylaws unless I see a hand go up. Then that's carried. Now, members of council, those that are following the agenda, regional council update, any of my regional colleagues, anything that they would like to add with regards to the regional council update? I'm not seeing any hands go up at this point. We do have a confidential item, unless there was one member of council that wanted to go into confidential session. I will assume that someone might be prepared to move the acceptance of this, and going to the clerk, maybe she already has one here, and she does it. Does any member of council need to go into confidential session? I'm not seeing any. Have a resolution moved by Councillor Di Lorenzo and second by Councillor Cluett, and be it resolved that council approve the 2020 Sports Hall of Fame inductee recommendations as presented in Schedule C. Any questions with regards to this resolution and or the report? Okay, now I'll work on an assumption that everybody's in favor of it unless I see a hand go up in opposition. And that's carried. And that, members of council, takes us to the open session and adjournment then. Is any member of council or anything they'd like to add? I have a few comments before we adjourn. Madam Clerk, have we forgotten anything to start with? Okay, any member of council before I adjourn? Just one thing I'd like to say that to not only my colleagues and staff, but all the citizens of Milton and Halton. Right across the nation, happy Canada Day. We'll be not meeting as a council virtually or otherwise until after Canada Day. Canada's birthday is coming up in, what, 8 days now, if my math is correct. It'll be a little different celebration for, Canada's birthday this year for many of us, including yours truly. Really is a time to get out there and celebrate our nation. And I know a lot of us will be doing it virtually. There's different functions being held virtually there. So, however, and whenever you can get involved, and wishing one another a happy birthday on behalf of the country, I'd like to do so. So with that, I want to go on record and saying happy birthday to this nation. I believe if my math is right, we're 153 years young. So happy birthday, Canada. With that, members of council, I adjourn this council meeting of June 22nd, 2020. This meeting is now adjourned.